mean, one of Jung's claims, for example, was that the Christian passion was an archetypal redemptive tragedy. And by archetypal, he meant that it specified the central pattern with unerring accuracy, and so couldn't be superseded. Now, the reason
archetype that couldn't actually have a type.
It couldn't be superseded, like, because so a way of thinking about
it could be imitated maybe, but it wouldn't have the certainly in context of Christian theology, it wouldn't have the salvific effects that are attributed.
Well, it
Christ's
is imitated.
sacrifice.
I mean, the martyr,
or the redemption of humanity. No one other than Christ can or needs to achieve.
Right. Well, that's
redemption
almost
of humanity.
well, and that's the hypothesis. And the idea, I mean, that psychological idea is something like this: that tragedy, redemptive tragedy, but let's just go with tragedy to begin with, has a form. Now, we know that because we wouldn't be able to have the category of tragedy if tragedy didn't have a form. Now, you could imagine 1,000 tragedies. Now, you could imagine extracting the essential features of those tragedies. A large language model could probably do that, by the way. Anyways, then you could imagine constructing a single tragedy that exemplified the core elements of the common features of tragedy. And I think that's exactly what the Passion story does.
Do you think, I mean, there's a big debate about this among theologians, particularly in Cambridge, as to whether tragedy is the right prism to understand what happens on Golgotha. I mean,
well, it doesn't specify the resurrection.
No, that's right. And
that's a problem.
That's a problem, exactly. So the question is, the denouement, as it were, the resurrection, as it were, it doesn't permit us to think of that sort of radical sense of loss and incommensurability that you see is very much the mark of the tragic.
Well, it's actually a comedy, technically speaking, right? Because it has a happy ending, right? But the bulk of the drama is the tragedy and the encounter with the depths of suffering. And you could think about the Passion story as a thorough explanation of the dimensions of suffering, right? Because the death occurs to someone who's young. It's the most shameful possible death. It was designed to be the most painful possible death. It's imposed by a tyrant. It's brought about by betrayal. Like, you can just stack, all you have to do is make a list of all the terrible things that could happen to you that you would think were terrible, expand them so they're the worst of their form, and then aggregate them. And that's what you have in the Passion story. And so that's in a way that's why it's a limit case. You could tell another terrible story, but if you told a story that was just as terrible, it would look very much like that story.
And it's a story that gives one hope. Would you say that it's a story that gives you hope to a degree that no other story can? I mean, that was the sense, I think, around the table for all of us, even those of us who would not consider ourselves church-going Christians. I mean, we like to talk on this podcast about what dawn might look like.
Well, even practically speaking, I mean, the Christians defeated Rome. Well,
from the catacombs.
Exactly. And so
peacefully,
merely from a secular perspective. Well, and that means they also established civilization on a basis other than that of, let's call it, nobility and power.
And what were they doing in the catacombs? They were celebrating the Eucharist. They were They were not repeating the sacrifice of Christ. They were recalling the sacrifice of Christ. And that was actually the reason they were in the catacombs, was because really it was on the Sundays that they that as it were, the persecution really happened, because it was the best way of finding out, most efficient way of finding out who was a Christian. It was when you watch what they do on the first day of the week. They're the only ones who gather on the first day of the week. Very eccentric bunch. Hence the catacombs. And
well, you have this weird inversion of power too that Nietzsche described and criticized. The part of the Passion story, part of the implication of the Passion story, is that the ultimate sovereign of mankind is someone who subverts power to service to the lowly, right? And so it's a complete inversion of the idea of noble power, and it wins.
So, but do you get off Nietzsche's bus? I mean, do you say, look, Nietzsche went too far in his critique that Christianity ended up valorizing victimhood and slave morality? And do you think, come across a couple of Nietzscheans myself who'd say, Christianity is the problem here. The valorizing of weakness, victimhood culture. This is the way Christianity was always going to end.
I think it's one of the most common misinterpretations of Christian doctrine.
Right.
It can go in that direction.
Yeah.
It's a heresy. Yeah. And it's a comprehensible heresy. But no, I think Nietzsche was wrong in that regard. Yeah. He was wrong in many fundamental ways.
I mean, it's funny. Nietzsche, obviously, he advances this view that Christianity is a mechanism for the weak to keep in check the strong, to create an artificial level playing field of kind of egalitarianism. And Marx, around about the same time, a little bit sooner, is arguing that no, what religion is, it's a tool that the powerful use, the property-owning classes use to keep in check the poor. And so
criticized about both
it's funny how these two great critiques of Christianity in the 19th century can't both be right.
Right.
Maybe they're both wrong, but they can't both be right. There's a deep tension there.
Definitely. And it's paradoxical. I mean, you can't have both those criticisms at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that the strain of thought that valorizes the victim is the spirit of Cain and not the spirit of Abel. And Christianity is the spirit of Abel, not the spirit of Cain.
So maybe it's that part of the problem here is that it's the valorizing of victimhood, but also at one that has forgotten that sacrifice has been put to an end, and as it were, the sacrificial logic, or at least what broke the...
Christ isn't a victim.
No. Yes and no. I mean, I think the issue is...
It's not a victim because he does it voluntarily. It's not like it's imposed on him, although in principle...
The ambiguity, of course, is there in Gethsemane. There's a sense that he does do it voluntarily.
Yes, right? There's of course there's some hesitance. I mean, of course there is. But the voluntary aspect is absolutely crucial. Like we know, for example... If you look at how people respond psychophysiologically to stress.
The surrendering of, it's not my will, but yours be done,
Well, if I impose a stress on you and I impose it on you involuntarily, your pattern of psychophysiological response is entirely different, right down to the neurochemical level, than the pattern that you'll bring to that you'll allow to manifest if you're doing it voluntarily. There's a huge difference between subjugation to fate and acceptance of fate, or welcoming or celebration of fate. And Christ's sacrifice is a celebration of the most brutal fate. And it's an impossible paradox. And does it inspire hope? Well, everyone hopes in their heart of hearts that they'll be able to contend with their dreadful fate nobly. And it's certainly what we admire in people, and it's what we hope will happen to the people we love who are suffering a mortal wound. We hope they go to their grave with their head held high and with dignity, and they don't degenerate into anger and bitterness and self-hate and turn against the world. So our ability to admire that fortitude in the face of catastrophe is innate. And no wonder, because there isn't anything different. There's no difference between contending with your fate and living nobly.